Now, it's a note-taking page, and what I should tell you real quickly is that we usually spend some time trying to justify why negotiations is an important process. You'll note some of the notes are the changing nature of the professional salesperson, concept versus brand, new markets, but the whole reason is an additional tool for cost justification. So I want to really wind up talking to you about three kinds of cost. This will kick open the door of cost accounting, because that's really where the whole cost justification issue goes on. What does it cost me and how can I justify it? For example, an analysis I recently went through in my own company. What will it cost me to put on another salesperson? How many dollars will it take to have broken even? And then that's cost justification. That's where we're heading. And that goes into not the balance sheet document, but rather the P&L document. So here are the three costs. Write them down, and then one other note. First cost is fixed cost. Second cost, we're going to talk about our variable cost. And the third cost, our total cost. And if you'll write out in the column one little blurb, it is the marginal increment of utility. Now, just hear this. Don't worry about understanding it just a second. I'll lock it in tighter in a minute. But in the schedule of operating expense in a P&L statement, always the total of fixed and variable equal total. Just hear that for a second. Now, let's start to understand this. We're going to start to paint a picture. Can someone give me a definition of fixed costs, either in your own business or a customer business, without giving me an example? I don't want the example yet, because sometimes we hear an example and we really don't understand the definition. So the definition without an example, nice and loud.
Cost that doesn't change.
That's right, up to a point. It needs to be finished.
Constantly recurring cost.
That's also possible in most instances, but I want to finish this statement. You're half right. You're not half wrong, just half right.
Cost of manufacturing.
It might not just be manufacturing. Fixed cost.
Overhead?
Overhead's an example, sometimes. So we're going to pick up on yours. Those costs that do not change relative to either manufacturing or sales, depending on how you do your books, okay? Because some people keep track of what they do by units of manufacture. Other people keep track of by sales, which is the same thing, except for the bubble in the warehouse. So fixed costs are those costs that do not change relative to sales or manufacturing. Now, I also have to say to you, within an accounting period, because we can change a fixed cost, as we'll see in a few minutes. I want to give you a warning. There used to be a guy by the name of Webster. He wrote a book called a dictionary. Webster and the National Society of Certified Public Accountants never got together and talked, because Webster would write fixed as affixed, stationary, unchanging, and whatever. The truth of the matter is, fixed costs do change. They just don't change relative to sales and volume. They change relative to management decisions. Now let's look at some examples of fixed costs so we can lock it in. Can anybody give me an example of fixed costs in any of your business or your customer business? What? I'm not hearing it.
Raw materials.
Now, raw materials are going to become a function in a manufacturing operation of getting to gross profit. They are not part of your schedule of operating expenses.
Rent.
Yes, okay, let's take a look at rent for a minute. Let's pretend we rent a building. Usually, not always, but usually, the people we rent it from have no concern about the number of units of sales that we do in that facility. So let's say the rent's $100 a month. If we make no units, you still want the rent. If we make 5 units, we still want the rent. If we make 10 units, we still want the rent. That's all history. Now, Greg's point is, we can see we're going to have to make 20 units, and this won't be enough space. Therefore, we will change the fixed cost by renting more space. So fixed cost does change. It just doesn't change relative to a period in the history, or an accounting period, driven by volume. Now, is that always true? No. You know water tower? Many of those rents are tied to volume. They might be $10,000 a month plus 1% of sales. So they have both a fixed and a variable connection to the rent. It's not always true, but usually. Give me some more examples of fixed costs.
Utilities?
Could be, but
Pretty much.
now
Well,
let's.
Let's say, I guess not because we have production, electricity.
Yeah. So let me tell you, you're both right and wrong, and that's one of the costs that probably gets split. For example, I'm hoping that somewhere outside this door there's an exit sign, and by law they have to keep it running all the time. There's probably a secretary in this building someplace working at a desk, and they have to keep the light on over her desk. That's fixed cost because the unit of sale here is number of rooms sold. So let's say they're at 85% capacity. The electricity over the secretary's desk costs the same as when they're at 40% capacity. The difference is when they go to 85% capacity, the electricity gets turned on in all those rooms. Hair dryers, television sets, lights to read by. So go to a factory for a minute. All the offices and the exit signs and the general lighting in the warehouse has to be on all the time. That's fixed. Doesn't matter the number of units. Put on the second shift, turn on that 10 horsepower motor and rev up that 440 line. You are now eating juice relative to volume. So you see, some expenses can fall in both categories.
How about heating and air conditioning?
Typically, heating and air conditioning are thought of as fixed. And the reason for it is, let's say there's an office in this building. Just because we don't fill up the rooms doesn't mean we can turn the air conditioning off for the office workers. So it can be a fixed expense.
The distinction you're making about the 440 engine on the second shift, are you assuming that the 440 engine was not turned on the first shift?
No, I'm assuming that
It was?
what I'm assuming was it had to be turned on in the second shift because of increased volume.
Okay,
That's why it's variable.
okay. And it wasn't even on in the first shift?
Maybe not. Let's say business gets so terrible that we didn't run it on the first shift either.
Okay.
So there are things that are related to volume and therefore they're not fixed costs.
How about like the depreciation expense for either equipment or
Excellent.
buildings?
Any time you have a depreciation schedule, or let's talk about a payment schedule to a bank, a lease schedule. You buy a forklift and you have 18 payments, or you have a depreciation. Those are all fixed because the bank wants their payment, or the depreciation schedule is an accounting function, whether you sell 1 unit or 100 units. Are we?
All your non-production salaries.
Yes, usually salaries, as a matter of fact. The office manager, etc. Okay. Now, then to take that definition a little bit further, let's look at the definition of variable cost, and let's just draw a big blanket over that and say all those costs that are driven by volume. For example, sales commission. Anybody here on commission? That's not an expense to your company if you don't sell. Another example, maintenance. When things are busy and machines get run, they wear out, and therefore maintenance cost is higher than when things are not busy and you don't run the machine. Okay? Now we're going to look at examples of that in a few minutes, but I want to build a business to clear this up. All I want you to hear is that the salary you talked about, the rent and the depreciation schedule you talked about, and the commissions to our salespeople all get added together as total cost in the operating expense side of the P&L statement.